This is a conversation with Megan Marod. She's an actor, singer, tour guide, and content creator. She's one of the most popular tour guides in New York City with some of the best recommendations and tours through her brand, The Megan Daily. In this conversation, we discuss her love for history, her favorite parts about New York City. We talk about the evolution of New York City. We also dive into the life of a tour guide, the type of skills it takes to become a good tour guide. And we also plan out the ultimate New York City itinerary. This is no time. If you like what you see, then do hit subscribe on YouTube, follow on Spotify, or rate 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. This project runs on your love and support. So if you'd like to see it continue, do consider making a donation on Patreon, Anchor. You can subscribe on Instagram or leave a gift on Reels. If not through financial support, then do consider sharing these episodes, leaving your likes and comments. All forms of engagement, they really go a long way. For the forms of love and support, you can follow this channel on Instagram or Twitter, or follow me personally. And now, it's no time. Carl Jung once said that, who has fully realized that history is not contained in thick books, but lives in our very blood? As every other person from Florida, you decide to study ancient Roman history at the University of Michigan. Looking back now, are you able to pinpoint when and where your love for history began, the exact point when you realized that history is not just contained in thick books, but also in your own blood?
That's such an interesting question. I don't know that I ever grew up thinking I was going to be so involved with history. Yeah. But in retrospect, in high school, I was obsessed with the idea of winning this award. There was an award called the Pathfinder Award in Florida, and it's supposed to be someone who's in high school, a high school senior specifically, that excels in a certain topic. So it could be history, it could be theater. I always wanted to get it for theater because I'm an actor. But it turned out that my senior year of high school, I just had this amazing history teacher, and she taught specifically American history. And somehow I just excelled at that class. I loved that class. I loved studying for that class. I did not win the Pathfinder Award. But I feel like somehow I was like, I'm going to win the Pathfinder Award for history. And that kind of got me started on a historical path. I think that was my first time I realized I had a historical obsession. And then when I went to University of Michigan, I feel like my whole life has been plan Bs. Like I had this plan A, and then plan B ends up becoming much more wonderful than plan A. So I went to University of Michigan. I wanted to go for theater. I did not get in for theater. So then I said, I'm going to study political science. And I actually started out studying political science, and I didn't like political science because in political science specifically, it felt like everyone had a point of view, and they were never willing to change that point of view. One of the earliest classes I took, they had us debate something along the lines of, should we change red lights to purple lights while driving? And no one was actually listening to anyone's arguments. They were just, I'm going to be on the side that we should keep red lights, and never change it. So I switched over to history. And the thing that excited me the most about history was how open everyone studying history was to new information. Like if you discover a new archaeological site and suddenly you get evidence that there were 50,000 people living in a town instead of 5,000, you say, oh, how interesting. Let me learn more. And I love that, just being open to more information as it came in. And I think that's when I really started to fall in love with history. When I realized that historians are always curious, they're always wanting to get more information. And then you can figure out how that information applies to life today, life in present times.
The multiple parts of that answer that I really like. The first is, you come across this so often that there's this one inspiring teacher in school that ends up shaping someone's life. If there's any testament to like the role that teachers play, this is another shining example of it. Like one great teacher can make you just choose a career path. And I also get your point about, well, firstly, I don't know if it's something to be happy about, but like the fact that you kept getting your plan B and it worked out better for you. There's like something beautiful about it. Like in a way, like something set out for you out there, and it's going to be much better than you can ever imagine. How did you settle on ancient Roman history? So you wanted the Pathfinder Prize in American history, Where did Roman history come into this?
I also have an obsession with Shakespeare, like a deep, deep, deep obsession with Shakespeare. And something I feel a lot of people don't know is that in college, the Royal Shakespeare Company came to University of Michigan, which is where I attended college. And they did a residency. They did specifically Henry VI, parts 1, 2, and 3, and Richard III. And I just was obsessed with them. I was like, oh my God, Shakespeare. I literally went up to one of the actors and asked if I could run away with them in the Royal Shakespeare Company.
As you do. That's what we all do with Shakespeare.
It's interesting because David Oyelowo, who ended up playing Martin Luther King in the Selma movie, he was playing Henry VI in that. So wow. I knew David Oyelowo before he was super famous. He was not the one I asked if I could run away with the Royal Shakespeare Company with, but he was very, very kind.
Name drop.
The one that I asked was Sam Troughton, who also is in a lot of recognizable television shows.
Maybe because you asked him, you boosted his self-esteem so much that
was it. And I ended up actually going to work with the Royal Shakespeare Company in the capacity of sort of an assistant director. And while I was there, they did a production of Titus Andronicus. And I was obsessed with this production of Titus Andronicus, which took place in ancient Rome. And they also did, no, it was just Titus Andronicus. Yeah, I just became obsessed with it. And I also worked on a production of Coriolanus with them. So those both have like deep ancient Roman connections. And I just feel like as a result, because that was in college, when I was choosing my history courses, I was like, since I'm so obsessed with Titus Andronicus, I'm going to find all of the classes that have to do with Titus Andronicus. I ended up kind of doing a thesis on what we can tell about how Elizabethans viewed death and burial in ancient Rome based on Shakespeare's Titus Andronicus.
Let's hear it. We have to get into it now.
So that was how I feel I kind of fell into ancient Roman history. And then I took a ancient Byzantium history course with a teacher.
Sorry, before we get there, I have to hear the summary of the thesis.
It's funny. It's funny because it was a long time ago. It was almost 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. So I don't remember as much as I should. I feel very ashamed of this. But essentially, in Shakespeare's time, you had Queen Elizabeth, who was Protestant, and you had the Catholics who were in England before her father, Henry VIII, separated from the church so that he could marry Anne Boleyn. Yeah. So you had these two different religious beliefs that had very different ideas about how to bury their dead. And if you go back in time to at least Titus Andronicus, within Titus Andronicus, there are Romans, and then there are more of like these Gothic characters. And at the very beginning of Titus Andronicus, this character named Tamara, she has like a son who's dismembered and she can't properly bury him. And it causes this great turmoil in her that sort of sets off the rest of the play. And that was essentially an allegory, at least in my paper, for how the Catholics felt not being able to openly mourn their dead. So I think that essentially they were saying the way that death and burial, proper death and burial in ancient Rome was viewed is similar to the way that the Catholics viewed death and burial in Elizabethan England. And when you could not properly bury your dead, bad things happened.
Apologies for putting you on the spot, but yeah, that's very, very interesting. Sorry,
that was a long time ago. So if there's anyone who's like directing Titus Andronicus right now and is like, oh my goodness, you got something wrong.
Yeah, sorry, I took that digression. Thank you for sharing it. But yeah, you were talking about, so you did the thesis and then you moved to ancient Byzantine?
Well, I took a Byzantium course, course in Byzantium history, and the teacher's name was Professor Herbst. I believe he's teaching in New York now. And I mean, I just loved him as a teacher. Yeah, I was obsessed with him as a teacher. So I just took all the Byzantium courses that I could.
A large chunk of the population, I know a lot of people, I'm sure you know as well, they consider history boring, dull, obtuse. I was one of those kids who grew up thinking history is boring as well, because largely to do with the way it was taught in high school. It was a lot of memorization and the fun out of history was squeezed out. And now later in life, I'm starting to discover history can be a lot of fun if it's done the right way. So in an effort to convert these people, convert me as well, I guess, what would be your sales pitch for history? Why do you think history is important? What lessons can we learn from it?
Yeah. My sales pitch for history is essentially all movies that you watch are history. I think I realized that my theatrical background shows that I would gravitate towards movies that I would gravitate towards. They did tend to be more historical. The movie Gladiator. Yeah. That was also probably very influential in why I chose ancient Rome to study. But if you like the movie Gladiator, you are literally studying history. Yeah. The only character in Gladiator that did not actually exist was Maximus Decimus Meridius. There was actually a Caesar Commodus. Yeah. There was actually a Lucilla. There was actually a Marcus Aurelius. And I just feel like there's so much action in it. There's so much drama in history. Just Cleopatra, Antony and Cleopatra, that is history. That is Egyptian history, and that is Roman history. Yeah. I find that if you're looking for a good plot line in a movie, you just go to history. You don't have to you can make things up. I love The Little Mermaid. Yeah. Nothing against like pure fiction. Sure. But I just think that history, when it's told well, which most movies do and the television series do, it's the most exciting thing.
It's a great way of framing it that most movies, like they built on the framework of history. And when you talk about history as a subject in school, people just think of like the dull textbooks and like something boring. But you're right. It's just all movies are historical events as well. So if you start viewing it from that lens, then history is a part of everything we know and everything we like.
I will say something for, I guess, books. Like if you go to a Wikipedia article, I'm a big fan of Wikipedia. Just want to say when I'm making my little Did You Know videos, I go to Wikipedia because there's like a lot of really good facts there. Yeah. But sometimes the books, my history books, they were very, very factual. And you're right. They're not necessarily that exciting. Words aren't leaping off the page. They don't necessarily have a point of view, and they're not necessarily giving you any sort of a human element. And part of that is because they're trying to be a completely impartial observer and just give you the facts. That's what the textbook is there for. Then you have someone like Lin-Manuel Miranda, who wrote Hamilton, who specifically says he's always trying to find the human element of a story. So he wrote Hamilton with a very specific point of view. And that point of view was Alexander Hamilton was an immigrant. How many people in the United States can relate to being an immigrant coming in? And whether or not we're thinking of our grandparents or whether or not we are the person that immigrated ourselves, I feel like so many, if not all Americans are like, I have an immigrant experience in my direct lineage, in my direct story. So immediately there's something that you can relate to. So someone like Lin-Manuel Miranda is like, okay, this is how we can make someone relate to this fact. And then he really finds this like interesting story, these interesting human reactions between Hamilton and George Washington. It's not just George Washington had a white wig. George Washington was the first president of the constitutional United States. Like suddenly George Washington has a personality. George Washington has goals. He has a want. He has pain points. He has things that make him sad. And we're like, oh my goodness, he's human. So I really like the element of storytelling. I think that's why I immediately said, think of movies, think of television shows, think of Broadway shows, and tour guides. A good tour guide. A lot of times people think, why do I need a tour guide? I can go to the Wikipedia article and find everything I need to know about New York City. But the good tour guides, they find the human element and they tell you why you should care about the height of the Empire State Building, not just that it's 1,250 feet tall.
Fantastic points. It's this is a discussion we got into with Scott Wiener from Scott's Pizza Tours last year as well. I had him on the show, and it was the same idea where what you do with your videos, when you're using storytelling or using these skills to present history in a way that's a lot more engaging than what Wikipedia will ever tell you. And it's a pet peeve of mine, the way information is presented in museums and Wikipedia as well. I feel it's obtuse. One day I will change it. Yeah, me alone. I'm going to go and change all the museums.
Just the little cards. And in no way, I have so much respect for what museum curators do. But sometimes just the element of how a museum is set up, like you have a painting and then you have a little card and it says something along the lines of oil painting with fruit.
Yes.
1876. And I'm like, it's pretty, but I don't know why the artist chose to paint this particular basket of fruit. And in my history courses, I had this wonderful teacher. Her name was Cindy Sowers. I took a class called Ancient Medieval Barbarians, I think was the name of the course. But we specifically took the works of art and we really studied them. And it was like, when this painter painted this, notice that the light is specifically lighting like a skull that this the subject is holding. And the idea was supposed to be the light is shining onto the skull because it's supposed to make the viewer think of their connection with death. And if you're just looking at it, you don't necessarily know. You're like, oh, it's beautiful. But when you're like, this artist, had just lost his mother and was trying to figure out like what happens to someone after they die so he could properly mourn his mom. And you're studying the painting like that, it comes alive. And the curators know that. Like the curators, I've talked to museum curators, they know this. The tour guides know this. Even the docents know this. But the way that a lot of museums are set up, I feel like it's hard for just someone who's passing through to know that. At least for me. Maybe I'm just a bad museum
You're preaching
goer.
to the choir. Like I think 5 or 6 years back, I used to work on these projects called smart museums where we used to try and make museums more engaging than the way they are. And my premise was that the information is fascinating, it's just the way it's presented. And there's a lot that you can do to change around it. Although things are changing, like one of my favorite experiences in the city is just to go to a museum and put on like the audio guide. And then as you walk across every painting, you just put on that and you just sit and just listen and just look at the painting and just unlock so many layers, like you mentioned. Like if you start noticing these things that you never noticed and suddenly the painting is so much richer to you and you like it so much more.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. You have dabbled around with so many different historical eras and you've taken so many different classes. Is there one favorite historical era person or an event that appeals to you the most, that you always go down this rabbit hole when you start reading about it?
I don't know. I think immigration history is really fascinating to me. Immigration history specifically in the United States. Yeah. Part of this is I feel like I get very combative because people will often say, this might get a little political, I apologize, but people will say something along the lines of, why don't people come here legally the way that they did when they came through Ellis Island? Yeah. And I'm like, have you looked into how people came during Ellis Island? Because first of all, Ellis Island opened up in 1892. It was the very first federal immigrant processing center in the United States. Mm-hmm. If it was the very first federal immigrant processing center in the United States and it opened up in 1892, did we have immigrants before? We did, but people never think that we didn't really have any sort of processing prior to 1892. 1892, we set restrictions for the first time. We had to have questions, but then we get to 1924 when the Johnson-Reed Act was passed. That was when we set quotas for the very first time ever. And I don't know how deep you want me to go into these quotas. Yeah. On Ellis Island alone, mm-hmm. and there were more immigrant processing centers that opened up after Ellis Island. On Ellis Island alone, you could have as many as 10,000 immigrants a day processed on just Ellis Island. 1924, the Johnson-Reed Act was passed. We set quotas. The number of total immigrants from the entire globe that could enter the United States was cut down to 150,000 total. So just think about how many fewer immigrants could come in in 1924 than in 1923.
Yeah.
If you went from 10,000 a day just at one immigrant processing center. One of the ramifications of this was leading up to World War II. There was a German banker and war vet who applied for a visa for himself and his family several times, never received it. His name was Otto Frank. You may have heard of his daughter, Anne Frank, and you can imagine how differently her diary would have turned out. Now, the Johnson-Reed Act of 1924 has thankfully been repealed. But between 1924 and 2023, there have been so many different immigration laws, Supreme Court cases, and just learning about all of them is mind-blowing and fascinating. And I find, especially now, that people are really interested in their own genealogy, how your own family came over. My last name is Marod, which is Syrian. They came over in 1904, and just knowing, whether or not they were considered white or not white in 1904. And there were several Supreme Court cases that changed and how different they would have been received if they came over in 2023. So I find that's very personal to a lot of people, to me, and I just find it's fascinating. So that's one where I think I'm like, immigration history, give me more stories of immigrants. I recently learned that Salvador Ferragamo of Ferragamo Shoes was processed on Ellis Island, just like all the people who were processed on Ellis Island. So I feel like that's my current rabbit hole subject in history. Is
very interesting. Yeah. And not many people talk about immigration history. So that's a fascinating area of history to definitely explore. Let's talk about New York. The legendary philosopher Alicia Keys once said that, "I'm from New York, a concrete jungle where dreams are made of. There's nothing you can't do. These streets will make you feel brand new. Big lights will inspire you." Deep, profound words. Let's get into a DeLorean. Let's get into a time machine. And let's go back to the year 2004. You just moved to New York City from Florida with the intention of becoming a Broadway actor. What was your first impression of this city? Both the good memories and the bad memories.
It's funny because if I moved here again, I would do it totally differently, knowing what I know now. Because I found that before I started tour guiding, I did not understand New York City. I just thought it was theater. And I love theater. I promote theater. Everyone should go see theater. But basically my scope of New York City was the theater district, where the dance studios were, which was steps on Broadway for me, mostly 72nd Street, and my very first apartment, which was up in Washington Heights. I didn't understand any of the history. I didn't really go to any of the neighborhoods. I didn't even know what New York City pizza was. I don't even know that I ate much pizza. I think I went to I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it right. Famiglia. That was my pizza place. It's really embarrassing, actually, when I think about it.
Famiglia, famous Famiglia, the Famiglia, La Famiglia. I don't know.
Yeah.
The famous Rays.
Yeah, it's really weird when I think back. And I think one of my goals when I'm tour guiding, when I'm creating my New York City content, is to make sure that people who move to New York City don't make the same mistakes that I did, because now I feel like I need to create something fun.
You don't have to.
They need to. I don't want them to make the same mistakes that I made, because the city has so much to offer, and it has something to offer no matter what your interests are, what your background is, and you're always going to learn something new. You can get any type of food that you want. And I'm there eating bad pizza. I'm sorry, I shouldn't bash famous.
I don't want hate mail coming through from Famiglia Pizza.
I mean, I loved it
All
at the time.
Saying, how could she say that?
But it's wild. I never went to Chinatown. I never even went to Brooklyn or Queens. I didn't go to Sylvia's in Harlem. There's so much good food. I want people to experience the food. I want people to experience the theater, but I also want them to experience the museums. I want them to experience the free events that you can do. in New York City. There's free events all the time, pretty much every year. New York City Tourism and Conventions has all of these weeks, like Restaurant Week and Theater Week, where you can get 2-for-1 tickets. I just never took advantage of any of that. I basically sat in my apartment, went to auditions, and would see theater if I was able to afford one of the tickets. I didn't even go shopping. It's really weird.
So that was your first impression of New York City. This brings up a slight, I guess, digression, a follow-up question. You and me, we have one thing in common. We are both staunch defenders of Times Square. I think on average, I defend Times Square once a week with people who say like it's crowded, it's dirty or smelly. And I always say that's missing the point. So on this rare occasion where we have two people in the room who both like Times Square, it's an early Christmas miracle. I have to get your take on it. Why do you think Times Square is important? What does it represent? Why should everyone visit it?
Oh my goodness. If you visit New York City and you don't visit Times Square, you're doing it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I can say. Actually, I can say a lot more. But I do believe that you're doing it wrong. And I get very angry when I hear people say, avoid Times Square. A tourist mistake is going to Times Square. I think that Times Square in many ways is beating heart of New York City. Like everything kind of radiates around it. You have the theater district there. So when you talk about my first impressions of New York City, that was my home base, wanting to go to all the theaters. So if you see a Broadway show, you're going to go to Times Square.
Mm-hmm.
I love all of some of these things are big tourist attractions, but I feel like when you're a tourist, you are actually a tourist. You're not going to live like a local. A local sits on their sofa, watches a lot of Netflix, and occasionally goes to a wonderful restaurant, but we're going about our everyday lives. When you're a tourist, you're engaging with the city in a different way, and you're trying to get 20 years of New York City experiences, sometimes in 24 hours.
Yep.
I think attractions like the Museum of Broadway and Rise New York are really wonderful. I have enjoyed them immensely. I think there's so much history in Times Square. So as a historian, I love looking at the little ghost signs that you see. There's a shoe store that it no longer exists, but you still see the sign for it. I think it's on 47th Street. You have actually some decent food. Los Tacos Numero Uno is there. Schmackery's Cookies, the official cookie of Broadway, is near Times Square. You have dance studios near Times Square. And then if you go, it's not technically Times Square. It's a block further away, but you get to Hell's Kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
And Hell's Kitchen has some of the best food in New York City. It's where all the locals actually come when they're meeting up with each other, because you have people coming from Harlem, people coming from Staten Island, people coming from Brooklyn. Where are we going to meet? We're going to meet in Times Square. So you're going to go to 9th Avenue, go to all of those restaurants, and you're going to see the locals there meeting up, having a great time.
Mm-hmm.
And then I am a fan of the billboards in Times Square. There's a couple of things. There's the midnight moment. It's a secret that I feel a lot of even locals don't know about. Every night from 11:57 to midnight, all of the billboards in Times Square sync up with one another, and they create a huge bit of digital art. It's really phenomenal to see. There's another billboard on 48th Street, the north side of 48th Street, that has like 3D images. It's just like, whoa. And then I work with a billboard called Welcome to Times Square, and you can get your photo on the billboard. And I've seen hundreds of people get their photos on this billboard. They freak out every time. And yesterday, I went to a free hip hop class in Times Square. The Times Square Alliance has all of these events. They'll have public works of art. There was one that you could actually engage with and like put roses on it for Valentine's Day. They have free classes 4 times a week through, I believe it's September 29th right now. So you can take music class, you can take dance classes in the middle of Times Square. And I went and I saw my physical therapist at the hip hop class. So when someone says locals don't go to Times Square, at least me and my physical therapist taking hip hop classes out there in Times Square. There's so much to offer. Why do you love Times Square?
This is how it works, Megan. I ask the questions.
No, I'm actually going to ask you this question though, because you said
your own podcast and then invite me as a guest, and that's how you get my answers.
You said that you were a fan of it as well. And part of my job as a tour guide is finding out what excites people about different neighborhoods and what confuses them and what makes them not like a neighborhood or like a neighborhood. I do think it would be a mistake to only do Times Square and to never leave. That was me when I first moved. Only do Times Square and go to my hotel. Only do Times Square and go to my hotel.
Yeah.
But I do think if you don't go to Times Square, that means you haven't seen a Broadway show. That means you haven't stood on the red steps. That means you haven't seen the ball drop, like the ball's up 365 days a year. There's billboard history there.
Yeah.
It's so much a part of New York City history. And if you don't go, if you don't stand at the crossroads of the world, you've missed out on a huge part of New York City.
What a fantastic sales pitch for Times Square. I will give you this one wildcard question that you can ask me about why I like Times Square. And then after that, no more questions for you.
Oh, no. Okay.
But yeah, the reason I love Times Square is it's built on the premise, which you said, it's the crossroads of the world. And for me, Times Square is just like every place you visit, one thing you should be in tune with it is the purpose of it, right? Expecting Times Square to be clean and like not crowded is, I feel, missing the point. I would hate to be at a Times Square that's empty, right? Because if it's meant to be a crossroads of the world, if it's meant to be like a physical manifestation of the entire world's culture, not just New York, of course it's in New York, but New York is meant to be like the center of the world and people from all around the world come across. It's meant to be this mirror of all these different cultures and people that exist and everything that we've achieved so far. And as a result, you're going to see people from all across the world, all type of languages, all type of performances. You see all these cartoon characters, everything that we accomplished in art, film, music. It's all there. The billboards represent all the brands and enterprises and so on and so forth. And of course, the architectural styles. You see, at least it's impossible to encapsulate the entire world in one place, but you do see a large spectrum of it in Times Square. And I think it does achieve that. And as a result, the externality of that would be that you will also see a lot of people. Where there are a lot of people, it will also be noisy. It might also get smelly. But if it's a true mirror of the world, it's going to have both the good and the bad.
Yeah, I love that. That's beautiful. It's a mirror of the world.
I'm going to sign it. And I'm going to autograph. And then maybe you can auction it. Who knows?
Oh, and there's one other like little secret in Times Square that I feel a lot of people don't know about. There's an AMC movie theater on 42nd Street. It's an old vaudeville house. And when you walk in, the area where you would buy your ticket, if you look up, you can actually see where the proscenium arches would have been. And as you go up the escalators to get to the theater that you're watching your movie in, you can actually see portions of the old theater that have been preserved. So you can see like the lighting rigs or a portion of the lighting rigs. Like there's history that you can find in Times Square if you know where to look for it. So if anyone sees a movie at AMC 25 movie theaters, look for that old theater. And that old theater is where Abbott and Costello did their Who's on First, What's on Second, I don't know's on Third routine.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Look at that.
There's so much history. And people just are like, oh, don't go to Times Square. No.
Yeah. We're going to change that. Yeah. The revolution starts with this episode. This is going to be the one. Suddenly there are even more people flocking at Times Square. What happened? It was this one episode. I'm going to ask you an unfair question. Which is your favorite building in New York City and why?
Oh, that's not unfair. Oh. I love the Chrysler Building.
Done. Easy.
It's done. It's very easy. I mean, I like it because it's sparkly. Yeah. Do you want to know why I like it?
Of course.
Okay. So I like it because it's sparkly. That's the first reason. But it has a really fun history to it as well. So it was competing with another building. It was competing with a building called 40 Wall Street to be the tallest building in the world. And it was this really heated competition. Like the two architects used to work together at the same firm. They had a big falling out. They were like, we're each going to prove that we're the better architect by building the tallest building in the world.
Yeah.
They would actually send spies over they would send spies over to one another's buildings and they'd be like, oh no, the Chrysler Building is going to be 800 feet tall. We better make 40 Wall Street, 870 feet tall. End of the day, 40 Wall Street was taller. But Mr. Chrysler Cars, did not want to settle for second best. So he and some buddies snuck into the building in the middle of the night, and through the chrome dome top, they put up the spire or the stick that you see on top of the building.
Yep.
And they made it the tallest building in the world. The people who owned 40 Wall Street were like, no, we're no longer the tallest building in the world.
Yeah.
They were so angry. They wrote letters to newspapers saying that's just a stick on top of a building. It shouldn't count. We have the highest usable floor. But ultimately it didn't matter because less than a year later, Empire State Building was completed, dwarfing them both. But I like that it very sneakily had that title of tallest building in the world for a very brief period of time.
I love that story, and I came across that story in the Bowery Boys podcast and the book. And Chrysler in general, I just really like the building because it just stands out. And the thing you mentioned about, I think New York had this phase between, 1900s to the 1940s, where I think every few years the tallest building used to keep changing. It was like the Little Singer building, then it became the Woolworth building for a while. I think I'm forgetting some buildings in the middle, and then it was Chrysler, Empire State came in the middle. There's some other buildings I'm forgetting. But yeah, it constantly had this like battle, and then finally Empire State won. Okay. That was an easy question for you. I thought it was going to be a tough one.
Oh, I know. Maybe I should have more favorite buildings, but the Chrysler Building, what's interesting is it's been my favorite building, I think, since the beginning. I remember liking it because it was pretty. It kind of looks like a Christmas tree at night. I really like Christmas time. I don't know. I've never gone to the top. If anyone knows how to get me to the top,
me in as well. Yeah.
let me know. But that's one that it's been very steady, and I've never felt conflicted. I've never been like, oh, that building's close.
No, I completely agree with you. The Chrysler Building, I often used to forget that it was in New York because people don't talk about it that much. And then when I see it, I was like, oh, this is the building. Like, I make people, like, if someone's visiting, I make them focus on, that's a Chrysler. Make sure you're looking at it, like what it inspired, what it represented in terms of Art Deco as well. It was just such a fascinating building. Okay, 5 out of 5 points for that. As a person who loves history, when you map out the evolution of the city, what are some major historical events that you feel shaped this city in terms of the layout, demographic, the culture? Are there some major, maybe not just events, people as well, that you feel had such a significant impact on the city?
Oh, there's a lot of them. There was, of course, when the Dutch originally came and sort of tricked the Lenape people into selling them the land. So that was sort of the first big thing. One of the things that I think is really interesting about the Dutch is that they kind of didn't care what religion you were, what ethnic background you had, what race you were. They really only cared that you knew how to make money. And I feel like that really set New York City on its trajectory for the rest of its history, because they said, if you know how to make money, you are welcome in New Amsterdam. And that set us up as a trading colony. Mm-hmm. And we have literally always been a World Trade Center site because of that. It really set us up as this economic center of the United States, which I feel in many ways has shaped the entire history of New York City. Of course, there's when the British came and took it over from the Dutch and it became New York. There's the American Revolution. I feel like I talk a lot about the American Revolution in a lot of my tours, but that's mostly because I do a lot of lower Manhattan tours. Great Depression. I feel that the Great Depression in many ways showed us who we were more so than any other event up until that point. Mm-hmm. And this goes back to the Empire State Building. Empire State Building was completed in 1931. That is a year that many people would consider to be the height of the Great Depression, when I believe it was 1/3 of America's population was unemployed.
Yeah.
And yet during the height of the Great Depression, New York City managed to reach the highest point in the sky that any building would reach for the next 41 years. And to me, the fact that we could do that during the height of the Great Depression showed us the spirit of New York, that yes, we'll get knocked down, we'll go through hard times, we'll go through depressions, but through it all, we're all dreaming big and we're continually reaching to that highest point in the sky that we can imagine.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that would come back into play. Of course, 9/11 is one of the major events that shaped not just New York City history, but all of American history. But once again, with 9/11, we kind of came together. Yeah. And when I give World Trade Center site tours, I always talk about how we came together and we rose like a phoenix from the ashes, stronger than we were before.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I'm not sure if there is an exact moment that I can pinpoint in our history for New York that we became those people who are going to endure all the hardships. It might have even been the American Revolution. British took over quite early, but we still came back as New Yorkers. But I feel like the Great Depression for me is maybe like the moment that we were like, we're gonna rise no matter what. There was, of course, the time when we actually got put on the grid system. There was DeWitt Clinton creating the Erie Canal that really solidified us as this worldwide trade center gateway into Middle America. So yeah, there's a lot of moments.
So many moments. You mentioned the Dutch colony, and I was so fascinated to discover how many of the names that we have for the areas around are still inspired from Dutch names, like Brooklyn, Staten Island, or like Bedford-Stuyvesant or something of that sort, right? Van Cortlandt Park, all these Dutch names still exist here. I also personally used to love the fact that the zoning laws, one single law created an architectural style of setbacks and the wedding cake structure. Who would have thought it's just one law and then it inspired this form of art, how it adapted to it. I always find that so fascinating, how much the butterfly effect of one regulation or one law can have. A lot of events to map out, you're right. And also how much of the city has been shaped by Robert Moses, for example, and how that has changed the urban planning of the city. So many things to unpack. That's one of the things that we love about the city. Let's pivot into your work. Let's dive into the life of a tour guide. You have some of the best videos out there about visiting New York, traveling to New York. So I have to pick your brains about it. What is the life of a tour guide like? What do you think are some skills, or what type of personality do you need to become a good, successful tour guide?
Well, you have to like people.
Damn it. That's
I feel that's really important. And there's a lot of historians who don't like people. So if you're not good at talking with people, then your skills are perhaps best used writing a book. Because so much of tour guiding is adapting to the specific group that you have on any given day and approaching them with excitement, empathy, and you just never know what the group's going to be. I heard another tour guide say it's like a blind date. You just don't know who's going to walk in that door. And there have been times, one of the very first tours that I ever gave was to a welder, and he started asking me about how all the buildings were welded together. And I was like, I have never thought about welding. I literally have never thought about welding, but people come from all of these different backgrounds and they're going to view New York City through their eyes. If they work for Citibank, they're going to ask you about all of the Citibank buildings, or they're going to maybe really be into the economic side of New York City. And as a tour guide, something that I try to do and my colleagues try to do is you take all of this information, like all the Wikipedia articles that you have read, all of the books that you have read, and you're like, okay, so this person is a welder. What have I read that has to do with welding? And you can also ask them lots of questions. You can learn from them. Like you tell me if this welding is good or bad. So being able to, like people, adapt the stories in a way that's going to excite whoever is on your tour in that moment. You obviously also have to know a lot of history. and information to be able to do that, to be able to say, okay, this person's on my Lower Manhattan tour, but they are members of the Coast Guard. So let's talk about Coast Guard history in Lower Manhattan, or perhaps more military history in Lower Manhattan. Also knowing about current events. So you have to know a lot of history, but people are here on vacation. So they want to know what the best restaurants are in a neighborhood. They want to know if there's a cool parade that's happening. They want to know if there's a street food festival or a free hip hop class in Times Square. So just knowing current events as well as the history, I find to be really important for a tour guide as well. So liking people.
You lost me.
History.
Yeah.
Current events. And storytelling. I think that you have to be able to take all of that information that you have learned and make it exciting stories. So it's not just this road was placed here in 1620, but it's like, why was this? For me, it's always about the why. Like, why was this road put here in 1920? That makes it exciting.
Do you have any physical, mental exercises, routines that you use to like set you in the right frame of mind, put you in the zone just before a tour?
I don't know that I do anything necessarily to put me in the right frame of mind, but I do always do vocal warm-ups. Yeah. I'm sure my neighbors love me for that because I am an operatic soprano, but your voice is so important to you as a tour guide. And sometimes I even sing to tell a story. So I find that having full access to your full vocal range is very important. I know another tour guide who always does physical stretches. If I was a better person, I would wake up a little bit early and do my physical stretches because it is a very physical job.
Yeah.
It's very physical. And I feel even people taking tours aren't prepared. They say, oh, we're walkers. And I'm like, do you do 20,000 steps a day? So I feel like you do have to be like physically very able. I am a fairly physically active person. I dance, I figure skate, do like athletic things, but I don't necessarily warm up physically before a tour. And sometimes if it's a topic that I'm not like as much of a master of, I will listen to the podcasts about it just to refresh my brain. But at this point in time, I feel like I've been doing tours for so long that I feel pretty solid on everything.
Let's unpack that. So you've been doing tours for so long. Has it ever been tough for you to do the same tour day after day, go to the same places, talk about the same things? I do take your point about like the crowd being different and that just changes the vibe of it. But after a while, of course, if you really break it down, you are going to like some of the same places. You maybe are sharing the same jokes or the same stories. Is it a challenge for a tour guide to like try to avoid that and try to still motivate yourself?
That's an interesting question. I find that there's two camps of tour guides. I actually really like doing the same tour over and over again. And something that I personally do is I always try to find new things to add to the stories. Mm-hmm. However, that being said, I did work out on tour boats for a while and we would do like 6 or 7 loops a day. And sometimes I would find my brain was just like, wait, am I talking about the Empire State Building or One World? By the time we got to like the seventh loop, you could like, your brain could be fried. But I really like doing the same tour. I know a lot of tour guides who do not like doing that. They specifically like doing different tours. That's like a really exciting challenge to them. It's why they got into tour guiding. So they don't have to do the same thing. And then I guess there's a third camp of tour guide who only likes to work from a script. I don't like working from a script. I like being able to kind of pull everything. But I have friends who they're like, if you give me a script, I will talk from the script. So I assume that they like giving the script all the time.
You are also an actor and you spoke about how you use the vocal warm-ups before a tour as well, which your neighbors hate you for. Are there any areas of overlap or other areas of overlap between acting and being a tour guide? Are there any set of transferable skills that go both ways? So skills that you learn as an actor that you can use as a tour guide, and skills that you learn as a tour guide that you can apply in acting. Have you found any?
Yeah, it's the crossover between acting and tour guiding is immense.
Okay.
First of all, it's about entertaining storytelling. So when you are studying acting, you are studying entertaining storytelling. You're understanding the structure of a scene. You're understanding, the rising action, the climax, the falling action.
Yeah.
And you're also understanding the human condition. So you're understanding what someone's motivation for doing something. So we were talking about like Lin-Manuel Miranda looking at Hamilton, trying to find this human element to it. So when you are crafting a story, and I consider the best tour guides are the ones who craft their own stories. And I think that this is the case because they find their own personal connection to whatever the story is. So when you're crafting your tour guide story, you are crafting it with that rising action, the climax and the falling action. You're asking why, for example, the Chrysler Building, why did these two architects want to outdo one another? Why was that important to them? Oh, it's because they used to work together at the same firm and they had a falling out and there's like a conflict there. So you, as an actor, you think about what the conflict is. Like when you walk into a scene, how are you going to get your way? Okay, well, they're going to now prove to each other that they're the best architect. The how is by building the tallest building in the world. And then the emotions that you're going to feel when you lose or when you win. So I think just understanding all of those emotions, the structure of a scene helps with tour guiding. Also, we study a lot like, how do you change your volume? How do you change your pitch when telling a story? And I find the best tour guides also incorporate an element of humor, and that joke telling involves a lot of the pitch, a lot of the volume, a lot of the speed. And we study that when we're studying acting. So that's a lot of the crossover.
So many interesting areas of overlap between the different professions as well. And of course, you're pretty much becoming a stand-up comic at this stage as well, learning delivery of jokes and pacing it as well. It's so fascinating. It's time for the game segment. Are you ready?
I don't know. Let's see.
We'll find out. The game is very creatively titled BYOI. Bring your own itinerary. Spent an entire week coming up with that name. Let's assume that I'm visiting New York for the first time. I've never been before. In fact, I'm going to give myself a character as well. I'm Chad. I'm in my late 20s. Money's not an issue for me.
Amazing.
But I'm not a billionaire either. But I've been looking forward to this one trip and I'm happy to splurge because it's going to be my New York experience. I watched this video on the Megan Daily channel, which said that the duration of my trip should be 5 days, 4 nights, the magic number. I've got the duration ready. Now I'm looking to hire you as my consultant for planning my itinerary out. I've got some categories of things that I want to do, and I would love to hear your recommendations of things that I should do and why for each. Are you ready?
I'm ready. But actually, before we get started, if that's okay, I just wanted to say, because you mentioned you had no budget.
Yeah.
Going back to the most interesting people, I had someone who wanted to spend the most money possible.
Wow.
As a guest. And that was surprisingly difficult. He kept saying everything wasn't expensive enough.
Who was the person? Was it like a celebrity?
No, it wasn't. I actually don't even remember his name. And if I did, I wouldn't tell you. But it was fascinating.
I know.
It was fascinating because this is something to know. If you're trying to spend a lot of money, you have to plan in advance. And he was planning a last minute thing. So we couldn't get reservations at the big fancy restaurant. No. Anyway, Chad,
that's so interesting. And what does this speak about me that I've never thought of that as as like a theme of a trip because I don't have the money to afford it. But imagine like what you're going to be doing, like helicopter tours, Michelin star restaurants.
They ended up buying a golden doodle. That was like part of their thing.
That's the level you're up. I can't even think on that level.
Yeah, they were like, let's go buy a dog. And I was like, yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's what we do. Look at that. Like I couldn't even think of what to do for it. Like I thought of like the helicopter rides and stuff. Wow. So I'm that far away from like planning the most expensive tour for myself. Okay, back to Chad. Chad. Yeah, I'm in character now. Okay, I'm hiring you as my consultant. I'm going to plan out the itinerary. It's going to be 5 days, 4 nights. I'm looking at my calendar for the entire year. I'm trying to decide what's the best season to visit New York in. And the answer is?
I think this is going to be an unsatisfying answer because in that same video, I talk about how it depends on what your goals are.
Yeah.
Because I love summertime. I think summertime is amazing. I love the heat. Other people hate the heat. Some people really want Christmas. Christmas is so magical. It's really, really magical. However, that being said, you want me to decide for you. Yes. Most people would say that like right now, late August, early September is the best time. And the reason for this is the weather tends to be fabulous. It's still warm, but it's not sweltering hot. You get a little bit of that breeze, the fall breeze coming through, and you still have the free events from the summer happening. So still got the free events in Times Square. Shakespeare in the Park, I believe, is currently doing The Tempest. So you have those free outdoor activities, but you're going to have less crowds, especially as we get into September.
So we've decided on a season. I'm now looking for a hotel room. Which is the neighborhood that I should look for a hotel room in if I'm visiting New York for the first time?
The neighborhood that you should look for a hotel room in. I am personally of the belief that you should look in and around Times Square. The reason for this is because especially if you have 5 days, right? You're not going to spend the whole time in one neighborhood. Mm-hmm. So you're going to be able to walk places. You're going to be able to catch subways that are going to take you any place that you want to go. And if you do choose to take a cab, you're also minimizing the cost of that cab that you are taking.
Yeah.
And you're not going to be spending, I don't know if Chad is a solo traveler, but is Chad a solo traveler?
I am.
Okay. There are some people who travel with families who might need to spend more time in a room.
Yeah.
But as a solo traveler, my thought is you're not going to be spending a lot of time in your hotel room. You're going to be out. You're going to be about. If you do go to the hotel room, it just is to drop something off. Maybe you need to change your shoes. Maybe you want to get dressed up to go to a Broadway show, but you're not going to be there for hours and hours luxuriating. So I think if you easily have the money to spend on a room at like the Plaza or one of the big fancy hotels, go for it. But my personal recommendation is to go for location first. That way you can easily get wherever you need. If you want to drop something off, it's a convenient, centralized location in Times Square.
That's great advice. Hopefully a lot of people who try to stay in like Brooklyn or Queens and then travel every day and they lose like a few hours will change their minds after they listen to this.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I had this conversation with my mom who mentioned the last time we went to, well, not the last time we went to Paris. I go to Paris a lot. My best friend lives there. But the first time we went to Paris, we all had to stay in one room. And I was 10, my brother was 8. So we were very young and the rooms were too small in the heart of Paris. So we ended up staying in La Défense, which is a bit further out. She kind of put me in my place and was like, if they're traveling with kids, it might actually be cheaper for them to stay in a bigger room out in Brooklyn or Queens than in the middle of Times Square. That being said, all things being equal, really think you want to try to be in Times Square. And if you're traveling with kids, the other argument is they might need to take a nap. They might need to change their shoes. And if you're not spending an hour commuting out to your hotel and then an hour commuting back, you're, in my opinion, making the most out of your time.
I agree. Yeah, definitely always a great way to, well, not only is it more convenient, but staying at the center of the city is always the best options. Perfect. Great advice. I watched another video on the Megan Daily channel that gave me this nugget of wisdom that on your first day in any city, you have to take a tour.
Yes.
Why should I take a tour on my first day and what type of tour should I take?
You need to take a tour your first day. I'm such a believer in this and I do this whenever I travel. First of all, your tour guide's going to be your first friend in the new city. So you get a friend in the new city. They're going to teach you like the ways of the land. For example, when I went to Italy very recently, they taught us about these things called nasone, which is how, if you're in Italy, you can get free, fresh, cool water. They just have these like water fountains. Apparently they look like a big nose. I have a big nose. And you get this fresh, clean, cool water. So if you're coming from another country, if you're coming from another state, you're going to learn in New York City certain words and phrases that are going to help you get around. You're going to learn, how to navigate the city, how to navigate the subway system, about all of the neighborhoods in New York City. I just feel like it's going to help you get your best local experience. I'm putting local in quotation marks because you are, again, trying to fit 10 years of experience into 5 days in this case. But you're going to get the local advice for the lay of the land and how to interact with people, how to interact with traffic, how to interact with buildings, how to interact with the weather with a tour guide. They're also, depending on the tour that you take, and I kind of am of the belief it doesn't matter what the tour you take is. One of the things that I specialize in is I hop onto buses for large group travel, and I give them a 4-hour private bus tour of Manhattan. And I love that because we really go through all the neighborhoods in Manhattan. You can see how they change. You can learn a little bit about the neighborhoods. We hop off in certain neighborhoods. And this gives you a great idea of, this is a neighborhood that I want to go back to.
Yeah.
It also lets you get all of the postcard items out of the way. So if you want to spend the rest of the time just sitting in a cafe in Greenwich Village, you can. If you can afford to take one of those, I recommend those. I know there's double-decker bus tours that also offer that. I personally am not like the biggest fan of the double-decker bus tours, especially the ones that don't have live guides. You want a live guide.
So much hate mail that's going to come through. I'm going to forward it to you.
I know.
Forward all the hate mail.
I know. Here's the thing. And I feel like I'm talking so much about this.
Familia Pizza is going to email first.
I loved it.
It's on record now.
The thing with the tours is I want to say you do need a live guide.
Yeah.
A lot of the double-decker buses don't have live guides. Big Bus has an evening loop, which has a live guide. So if you're going to do a double-decker bus tour, I recommend the Big Bus evening tour that has the live guide because you want that live guide to be your friend. You can ask them questions. You can ask them for personal recommendations. The good thing about the double-decker bus tours is you do get that like big lay of the land at a largely reduced price.
Yeah.
Like I would be quite expensive for that tour. That being said, if you just do like a walking tour of a neighborhood, you're going to get a lot of the same information. So if you do a walking tour of Greenwich Village, if you do a walking tour of Lower Manhattan, if you do a bike tour, if you do a boat tour, Circle Line offers a lot of good boat tours where you're going to see everything. They all have live guides. I'm just a fan of make sure that this tour has a live guide.
I completely agree. And you started this by talking about like the water fountains in Italy. And in one of your videos, I watched you like use this hack of like, if you put your thumb the right way, like it becomes it sprouts like a water fountain that you can actually drink out of. And I was like, only a tour guide can tell you all that. No Wikipedia page is ever going to be dedicated to this. So completely get your point. For that and more, definitely take a tour on your first day. Okay. I've taken my first tour. It's time to get hungry. So I'm looking for food recommendations. And the first thing I want to try is a New York pizza. Where do I go? Controversial. Okay. This is going to be very,
this isn't, I mean, I feel like Scott Wiener is going to like apparate. I will say when it comes to taking tours, I recommend Scott's pizza tours all the time.
Yeah.
And in terms of like that first tour to take on a first day, Scott's pizza tours gets the job done. I've taken his tours. They're amazing as a tour guide. All of his tour guides are top notch. So big fan, super plug of him. And I always defer to him when it comes to pizza. However, in this case, you're asking for my opinion. So
Scott's watching.
He probably is. The first thing you need to know is what makes traditional New York City pizza.
Yeah.
And that is pizza that's made in a coal-burning oven. You can get any type of pizza that you want in New York City. But if you're looking for pizza that's made in a coal-burning oven in Manhattan currently, I recommend that you go to John's of Bleecker Street. Yep. John, does Scott recommend that one too?
He actually went down this whole, I don't want to like interrupt them, but he went down this whole rabbit hole of depends on the style you're going for and the era that you're going for. There's the new style, the old style, and the current style. And you can get something for everything. But let's hear your answers, then we'll talk about Scott.
Well, I will say that's something I've also noticed with, like, for me when I travel, right? It's so interesting because as a tour guide, My recent trip to Italy taught me a lot about the travel experience. Sometimes I'm like, I don't know. You tell me what I want. I came to Rome. I want to eat pizza. You tell me what the delicious pizza is. Don't tell me there's a thick crust. Don't tell me there's a thin crust. Just I get one pizza meal. I get one pizza meal. Tell me what kind of pizza I want.
Yeah.
In that case, I feel like a lot of my guests, they're here for just a few days. And they're like, we want that traditional New York City style pizza. And what they're thinking of is the pizza made in a coal burning oven. So I send them to John's of Bleecker. It's also a nice sit down restaurant. So you can sit down, share a pie, 2 pies with your whole family.
Mm-hmm.
However, other people in their minds, they're really thinking of that greasy slice, in which case I send them to Joe's Pizza.
The Spider-Man one. Okay.
Yes.
So between Joe's Pizza and John's of Bleecker, I've got my pizza sorted. What if I was looking for a New York bagel?
Bagels are harder. Me and my tour guide colleagues, we often just say whatever bagel's closest to you is going to be the best because it's the freshest. But I do find that people really like a specific name. I really love Essa Bagel.
Mm-hmm.
Essa Bagel's fabulous. I really love Zucker's Bagels. And then I really love Russ and Daughters.
3 good ones to try. Cheesecake.
So again, people really want a name. I almost always recommend Junior's first.
Yeah.
Junior's, you're going to be like, this is the touristiest place ever. But the cheesecake is phenomenal. I believe it dates back to 1929 and they've elaborated on the recipe. I know of 0 people who have ever been disappointed in Junior's. Again, you can sit down and eat it there, or you can take it to your hotel, or you can buy 20 slices, stick it in a suitcase, and bring it home. The other cheesecake that I often recommend is Eileen's cheesecake. Eileen makes these like little tiny circle cheesecakes. I recommend that you go with friends, get all the flavors or like 10 flavors. I was really surprised because I'm a chocolate girl. And their mango cheesecake was my favorite. So that's why I say like go with people, get a lot of different cheesecakes and taste those cheesecakes. And then I'm going to throw a third one in. This one's like a loop, right? Junior's is the traditional New York City style, just giant slices of cheesecake. Eileen's little round cheesecakes, but still like traditional American cheesecake. Yeah. Then there's Keki's famous cakes in Chinatown. She makes a bouncy cheesecake. I will eat an entire cheesecake in one sitting. It is so good. They only she does not sell slices. I can talk. I'm so excited about Keki's. I can't even talk. She doesn't sell slices. She only sells like whole cakes, but you will eat the whole cake. It's so light and bouncy and fluffy.
So the central theme is, as Chad, I need to start loving humans again and make some friends so I can actually share and like try out everything because there's so much food. What if I want to try out a classic New York hot dog?
Hot dogs. Feltman's hot dogs are the original hot dogs. It is not Nathan's. There was a man, I believe it was Charles Feltman. Charles Feltman opened up a hot dog place. Well, it was actually a whole restaurant called Feltman's. He was technically the first person to serve sausage on a roll out in Coney Island. He had a worker there named Nathan Handwerker. Nathan Handwerker eventually went rogue, opened up a place across the street, undersold Feltman's. That's how Famous Nathan's came to be. Yeah. Now, I do like Famous Nathan's hot dogs, but Feltman's hot dogs are like out of this world, especially as prepared at McSorley's Pub. So you want to go to McSorley's Pub. Harry Houdini used to go to McSorley's Pub. It's really, really delicious. They serve just like half pints. I think it's just half pints of beer. So I like to go to McSorley's Pub and get myself traditional Feltman's hot dogs.
Fantastic. All these people who go rogue from Lombardi to Patsy to Giuliana and then Grimaldi's. So many stories of food, like of people who've gone rogue and they've created up these branches. Lively.
My biggest thing with Lombardi's at the moment is that they don't have their coal burning oven anymore.
Yeah, they move, right?
I know.
Yeah.
Well, they moved, but then during the pandemic, they had to downsize and they ended up selling the half of their building that had the coal burning oven.
Yeah.
So now they just have a normal oven. Now, to their credit, I couldn't taste the difference. I didn't know. But now I'm like, okay, you want the coal burning oven for me if you come to New York City.
And final, any unique dining experience? Maybe it could be luxury dining as well, but any one restaurant that you think is unique to New York?
It's funny because I grew up in a neighborhood that didn't have any Asian food at all. So the fact that we have like Korean hot pots is so exciting to me. And I feel like it would be really exciting to a lot of people coming to New York City, especially if they're traveling from a place like where I grew up in Florida, to be able to try all of these different Asian cuisines that they wouldn't have access to. So I really like almost every place in Chinatown getting soup dumplings. Those, for anyone who doesn't know, because I did not know what soup dumplings were growing up. They are dumplings that have the soup in the dumpling. Yeah. They are not dumplings in soup, which surprises a lot of my guests as well. For people who live in New York, we're like, we have soup dumplings at least once a week. But it's like a lot of people don't have access to this type of food. Yeah. So I recommend getting something such as soup dumplings or Korean hot pots. Also, I live up in Harlem. We have a lot of really good food in Harlem. Red Rooster, they have a jazz brunch, I believe, which is really cool. Marcus Samuelson has a really interesting story. He's the man that the founder of Red Rooster. I feel like he really kind of embodies what Harlem is, which is a mix of a bunch of different cultures. Charles Pan Fried Chicken. My fiance wept the first time he ate this fried chicken because it was so delicious. Wow. It's not like a sit-down restaurant, but it's so good. I really like that as a restaurant. And food trucks. You have to eat at our food trucks.
Let's hear one.
Now, the thing about the food trucks is it's so expensive to open up a brick and mortar restaurant in New York City that a lot of times these classically trained chefs will open up a food truck first because it's more affordable. Mm-hmm. And they drive around to different neighborhoods, see where their food is the most popular, and then they'll end up opening a brick and mortar restaurant if the idea is really good. So one of the big famous examples is Halal Guys. Yeah. But I will also say that I gave a food truck tour to a health and hygiene inspector of a very well-known company. I will not name the name of the company, but very, very well-known company. And he was freaking out because he was like, food trucks are going to be unhygienic. Oh, no. He inspected every food cart himself, and he could not find a single thing wrong with any of the food carts. So I'm a big fan of the food carts. And it's how New Yorkers eat. We're like running. We're on the go. Yeah. We're like shoving food in our face.
No time. Yeah. Busy. Yeah, I get it.
So I feel like that's a New York City experience. And one of the things I say, I have a video called 16 Things You Must Do in New York City. So I say you must eat at our food carts and you must eat at one of our baller restaurants. That's, of course, cost prohibitive. Something like per se is $350 per person. Yeah. But you get this like 16 course meal. It's basically like seeing a Broadway show, except for the food is the show.
I'm hoping someone one day buy me a meal at 11 Madison Park. Is that the one? Yeah.
I really want to go to 11 Madison Park.
I can't afford it.
I really want to go there too. Yeah. I've only been to Per Se. That's been my only baller meal, but I still talk about it. It was so good.
So worth it.
And it was like 16 courses, but it wasn't. It was like 50 courses. Dessert was one course and it was like 20 courses in and of itself. And they gave me like a box of truffles to take home. It was amazing. Like it's expensive. And I recognize that a lot of people do not have, like it's something that I would have to save up for massively. If I was traveling and I was going to eat at one of these 3 Michelin star restaurants, I'd be like, okay, we're taking my tour tip money. This is my Michelin star jar.
Yeah.
But it was such a memorable experience that I would say it's worth saving up for if that's in your scope.
I'm going to start the piggy bank today.
Yeah.
Okay. We've got a lot of food options, a lot of fantastic options. What if I want to go to one observation deck? Which one do you recommend?
This one. I'm an observation deck nut. I'm an observation deck nut. I'll go real fast through all of them because again, I would probably ask what your motivation is, but Empire State Building, that's the OG. If you want to reenact the famous movies, famous television shows, if you want to pretend that you're in King Kong's palm,
Sleepless in Seattle.
Yeah. Sleepless in Seattle, Gossip Girl, all of those. Elf has scenes in the Empire State Building. You want to go to the Empire State Building. That's the OG.
Mm-hmm.
I also recommend that you get the expensive skip the line pass because it will change your entire experience at Empire State Building. Top of the Rock. Many people love Top of the Rock because they say it gets the best view of the Empire State Building. You're like facing the Empire State Building face to face. So if you want to get that famous photo of the Empire State Building, you want to go to Top of the Rock. Top of the Rock is also at Rockefeller Center. So you're surrounded by a lot of cool things to do. So like you could go up to Top of the Rock, then eat at one of the amazing restaurants in Rockefeller Center, and then go ice skating or roller skating, depending on the time of year. And that's a really nice pairing. You have One World Trade Center. Mm-hmm. One World Trade Center is my favorite. It's my favorite because it has tour guides. I love that it has tour guides. You can ask them questions. They give tours. They give presentations. It's also all enclosed, which a lot of people don't like, but I like it because it's climate controlled. It could be blizzarding. You're going to be warm and toasty. It's awesome. It can be really windy. You're still going to look great in your photos because your hair is not blowing around. So I love One World. Edge, to me, feels like you're flying. It has the highest outdoor observation deck. Technically, One World is higher, but Edge has the highest outdoor observation deck. And to me, it feels like you're flying if you're at Edge. Summit One Vanderbilt is the hottest, hippest, newest kid on the block. If your goal is to get Instagram photos, you want to go to Summit. That is the Instagrammable one because it has a room with silver balls and a room with mirrors. Yeah. But I would probably say a lot of people are super happy with Top of the Rock as the first choice. And then if you want history, One World.
I feel like you named all the ones. I think because of the hate mail you're going to get from Famiglia Pizza and the other ones, now you've listed on all the observation decks. No one's losing out. What about a museum? Which museum should I visit?
Tenement Museum.
Yeah. Your personal favorite. Over the Met, over the MoMA, over the Natural History Museum.
You cannot get what the Tenement Museum offers anyplace else. You can only go into the Tenement Museum with a tour. It's actually an old tenement building.
Yeah.
You walk in, you learn about the people who actually lived in that tenement building. The tour guides are engaging. Some of them are very interactive in terms of tours. I love the Tenement Museum. It's the only museum I've ever been a member of. Now, if you're just I don't care about immigration, I want an art museum. The Met. I think it's so big that you could spend just 10 seconds looking at every single work of art inside that museum. And if you were there from open to close, it would take you 37 weeks to see everything in the Met. So, go see the Temple of Dendor at the Met. And American Museum of Natural History, they just opened up the Gilder Center, which is really cool. It's a portion of the American Museum of Natural History. There's a butterfly vivarium. Butterflies land on you. It's fabulous.
Living the dream. Yeah.
They have a Titanosaur. The Titanosaur is so big, and apparently it's a baby. But I tried to just do a pan with my phone. It took me 12 seconds to do the pan with my phone to get the entire dinosaur in it. So
the baby.
The baby. It was a baby. I was like, oh my goodness, the room doesn't fit it. The dinosaur, the Titanosaur's head is out of the room.
Wow.
So that has a definite wow factor. I feel like especially if you're traveling with kids, the American Museum of Natural History is that's a hole in one.
That's a whole one. Okay. I feel like we did cover a lot of the landmarks in the first tour that we took on the first day, but if I can just get a quick list of landmarks that you should go to and the ones that are tourist traps.
I don't think any of them are tourist traps, to be honest. Okay. I feel very strongly about this because the reason why they're touristy is because they're awesome. I think that there is a reason to visit all of them. And there's also a reason to choose to do other things. Yeah. I think you have to see the Statue of Liberty. You don't necessarily have to take the boat and get off of the boat at Statue of Liberty, but you have to at least stand at Battery Park and see the Statue of Liberty. I love taking the boat cruises that go by it. You can see the Statue of Liberty for free if you take the Staten Island ferry. So you have to see the Statue of Liberty. I think if you do want to get off at the islands, it's really Ellis Island that like you want to save time for Ellis Island because that has that immigration history that I'm obsessed with. Central Park, you have to see Central Park. My favorite walk through Central Park, you enter at 72nd Street and Central Park West, and you walk across and you get to 5th Avenue and 76th Street. That you're going to see Bethesda Terrace. That's where like every movie was filmed ever. You're going to see Strawberry Fields. You're going to see the Alice in Wonderland statue. Grand Central Terminal. I feel like a lot of people don't think that they want to go to Grand Central Terminal, but when they get there, they realize that they really wanted to go to Grand Central Terminal. 9/11 Memorial, at least to pay your respects at the reflecting pool. I think that the museum's very intense, so you have to be like prepared to go into the museum. But I think that paying your respects at the reflecting pool, it's an important part of New York history. It's an important part of American history and world history. Rockefeller Center.
Mm-hmm.
I think that you just need to walk through it. It's, if nothing else, I really like the energy of Rockefeller Center. I really like walking down 5th Avenue. I know the shopping is really expensive. You don't have to buy anything, but a lot of just the buildings are impressive. Just to go into the Saks Fifth Avenue on 5th Avenue is impressive. And the House of Cartier used to be a single family home, and just to be like, whoa, one person lived here. So walking down 5th Avenue, that's another big one. I personally love shopping in Soho. I think that's my favorite neighborhood to go shopping in. I say go to my neighborhood in Harlem. See the Apollo. I feel like a lot of people forget about Harlem, and it's amazing. Lots of wonderful culture, lots of amazing restaurants there.
Amateur Nights at Apollo is one of my favorite shows.
Yeah. I've never seen it live, actually.
You have to.
No, I'm a bad Harlemite. Trying to think.
I think that's a great list.
Else.
I mean, if you think of anything, you can always email me.
Yeah. Oh, and
AI will generate you saying it. Don't worry.
Sit and people watch in Washington Square Park.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Pretty comprehensive list. I think we have most of the elements of the itinerary. One final thing I would check is, as with any place that gets a lot of tourists, there are a lot of scams that could exist in the city. What are some scams I should look out for? As Chad.
Yeah. Chad, if someone tries to hand you something, say no. That's essentially like, number one.
Rule number one.
Especially if they try to hand you a CD. My mission is to make sure that no one ever takes a CD from a guy handing them a CD. Oh my goodness. This big scam, the way that this works is there is someone who will hand you a CD. They will tell you the CD is free. They'll ask you, what's your name? You'll say, oh, my name is Chad. And then they'll sign it. They're like, to Chad from Man with a CD. And they give it to you. And then they say, that's going to be $40. Yeah. And you're like, you said it was free. And they're like, oh, but now it's signed. And it ends up like getting really, really unpleasant. Sometimes they even call the police over and insist that you fork over that money. So it just say no. And the truth is that if you are somebody in the music industry trying to make it, you are not handing out CDs to random people in Times Square. You are like putting that on like MP3s, digital, like trying to target people in the industry. The biggest scam, those CD guys. Same thing with, I call them faux monks. They're not real monks. If you ask them what their temple is, they cannot tell you the temple. They will hand you like a token. You'll take the token. Sometimes it's a bracelet. They'll then ask you for a quote unquote donation.
Yeah.
So say no to that. It's not necessarily a scam, but the people who dress up as the characters in Times Square, they will want a tip from you if you pose with them. So I say, just if someone approaches you and hands you something or is like, take a photo with me, say no.
A lot of scams to avoid. I think we've got the complete itinerary. Have I missed out anything? What do you think?
I guess the only thing would be like if you wanted to explore another borough.
Yeah.
If you wanted to like maybe venture outside of Manhattan. I always do like Brooklyn, going to like you can walk over the Brooklyn Bridge or the Williamsburg Bridge or the Manhattan Bridge, explore a little bit of Dumbo or Williamsburg. In the summertime, you could head out to Coney Island if you're more of a thrill seeker. They have a couple roller coasters out there. They have beaches. They have really good pizza, really good food in Brooklyn in general. In Queens, there's the Museum of the Moving Image, which is really, really wonderful. There's a lot of street art as well in both Queens and Brooklyn. That's another one where I would actually recommend that you take a tour.
Bushwick.
I think,
I actually ended up taking a tour of Brooklyn to go to Bushwick. It was such an experience.
Which company did you use?
It was an Airbnb experience.
Oh, fabulous.
Yeah. So it was like a person who stays in Brooklyn and they took us to Bushwick. And I never knew like you could have a museum of street art. Like the entire neighborhood is a museum of sorts. Such a fascinating spot.
And it's always changing.
Yeah.
Like definitely every year they have the Bushwick block party, I believe they call it, where they like repaint a lot of the walls. But even throughout the year, the walls get repainted. So you can go out there like multiple times a year and get a totally different experience.
Yeah. And because she keeps visiting it, she was just giving us like the history behind every mural because she's like, okay, this is what it was 2 weeks ago. And now someone's coming to build on top of it. So you can see like the layers. You can kind of see the evolution of it. I thought it was fascinating. We have the ultimate itinerary for New York City. I think that's an excellent performance as a consultant. What a fantastic itinerary. And I can't wait to actually check out a lot of these places myself as well. So that's a great list. Before we move into final questions, I would love it if you can interpret what masterpiece you have built with the Lego and what do you think I have built as well.
Okay, well, this looks like the cranes that clean windows of the skyscrapers.
That's it.
That's actually something that people love learning about that. I love learning about that. Essentially, on top of our tall buildings, we have like these little cranes, and they hang the window washers from the cranes. And you can. I worked as a tour guide at One World Observatory, and we would see them cleaning. So that's what I'm going to interpret. This is called window washer. I don't know why this one makes me think of a spaceship, but it does. I don't know. I think it's these things. There's like little rocket blasters. Yeah. So it's Barbie's spaceship. That's what I'm going to call it. And this is it's affordable housing in New York City. That's our new affordable housing unit.
Which area is this going to be in?
I feel like it's made for like Tribeca or Soho. The affordable housing neighborhoods.
Why oddly? I feel like it's
I say oddly because nothing is affordable in either of those neighborhoods. They are going to, it's like in a kind of like a area that's right between neighborhoods. Nolita, I think they're going to build an affordable housing unit where a park used to be. But this feels, maybe it's the colors. I think it's the colors. It feels like Soho to me. And they're going to put like a work of art underneath it right there.
Look at that. Through this episode, we got 3 masterpieces. I'm going to put it up on eBay. Let's see how much comes through. Fantastic. Let's move into some of our final questions. What are some books, movies, role models that have strongly influenced you in your life?
Let's see. When it comes to tour guiding, my friend Matt Baker, he is my tour guide mentor. He is like the reason why I tour guide. Yeah. So he is definitely one of the biggest positive influences in my life. And he works with my tour company now. So other people can book tours with him as well. Movies. I'm trying to think. I feel like we watch so many documentaries on YouTube. We watch Ken Burns. When I say we, I'm talking about my fiance and I. Yep. We watched the New York series. I believe it was Ken Burns about New York. There's a movie called 16 Acres. 16 Acres is about the original World Trade Center site, which was built on 16 acres of land. I think that is a fascinating movie. It's funny because I feel like I don't read as much as I should. I'm trying to think of books. I usually listen to audiobooks much more. And I listen to, it's almost like Anna Klutz. She's a travel influencer who also is a writer. And I really love the way that she creates content. I love the way that she experiences cities. She experiences cities trying to look for what's beautiful in them. So it's not so much don't do this, don't do that, but like here's the most beautiful, most romantic, most sparkly experience that you can have. And I listened to her book as well. And it just, one of the things that she talks about is what each location gave to her in her life. So depending on what she was going through in her life, she said, I traveled to Bali at a time when I needed to find inner peace. And I met this, person who helped me meditate. And I looked around at the mountains and I felt this way. And that was how Bali helped me find inner peace. And I feel like that's such a beautiful way of talking about different neighborhoods and different cities and different locations. So I kind of always want to aim to do that with some of my shorts and travel videos. I really like Anna Klutz as well.
Let's say the world is ending tomorrow and you can take one final vacation. Where would you like to go and why?
One final vacation. I feel like I really want to see Egypt. Really want to see Egypt. I really want to see the Nile. I feel like part of that is because as a Roman historian, so much of that is intertwined with Egypt as well. And I feel like ever since I was a little kid, I remember maybe this is where I fell in love with history. I had a history teacher who had these really old books. They were really old, and she called them her priceless antiques because we couldn't write in them or touch them because they were going to fall apart. And it talked about the Nile. And I was just like, wow. This was the start of so many amazing things, this river, and to think about all the people, the famous people from like Cleopatra who got to see the Nile. I really want to see the Nile. I really want to see the pyramids. I really want to see those Egyptian temples. So I might go there. But then there's another side. My mom and I have gone to an island called Sanibel every year that I can remember. It's a little island off the coast of Florida. And we couldn't go this year. That's why we went to Italy because a hurricane came and destroyed it. But I always feel like so at peace when I'm there. So I would love to go there with my mom again.
It's a great memory. And I'm looking forward to you visiting Egypt after having this calling of sorts. You have it with these small places. Like for me, it was like Rockefeller Center for some reason. Never been to it, but I had to go. And I ended up doing Top of the Rock on like my birthday because I was like, it has to be like, there's something about it. Can't explain it. So I completely get it. Last two questions. What would you like your legacy to be?
Oh man, this is something I talk about a lot with my therapist. I don't know what I want my legacy to be. Is the answer. There's a bunch of things I kind of look and I'm like, oh, that would be a pretty amazing legacy. One of the things is I always try to help people. Like my personal why when I'm creating content and when I'm giving tours is I want to help people have their very best experience in New York City. So if my legacy is that in 100 years, people are still using my information. In 1,000 years, people are still using my information to learn about how to experience New York City or how to understand New York City, even if it's just how to understand New York City in 2023 or 2022 or whatever years I'm lucky enough to be alive. That would be a pretty amazing legacy. Maybe I could be one of the primary sources that I studied in history class.
Of course. Yeah, I do think that with your work, with your videos, with your tours, you are spreading a lot of happiness. And like your name translates in Syrian to hope, I think you are manifesting your name with your work. So it's a great legacy that you're already building. Final question. What do you think is the meaning of life? Megan Marod.
That's a hard question.
Ramping up the difficulty as you go.
Was it 42?
Hitchhiker's Guide.
What is the meaning of life? I don't know that I actually have a true answer to that. I think that I just like to try to make people happy and enjoy it because we're here for such a short period of time. And I think that to make ourselves happy and to make other people happy is really, really nice. But I don't know that if that's a meaning so much as just, while we're here, let's try to have fun and be nice and help each other.
I think that's a great meaning and purpose in life. Just be happy, spread happiness. Can't go wrong with that. Megan, thank you so much. If people want to connect with you online in person, watch some of your videos, come for one of your tours, where can they do so?
So you can find me on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. It's the Megan Daily, like Megan Daily News. And you can also find my website. It's themegandaily.com. And you can book tours on the website as well.
Fantastic. Megan, thank you so much for a great conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.